dopamine should be limited and also not substituted. Now, before I get into what this actually means, what I mean by that statement, let me just kind of give you a summary of the modern world and how we consume things and how dopamine works. In our modern age, everything is to be consumed. We live in a consumer economy. You buy things to consume it, you watch things to consume it, you even read things to consume it. And no matter the different types of things that you're consuming, you can try to justify that one's more productive than the other, but in the end, you are consuming. And overall, 95% of things that we are consuming in our modern day are substitutes for things that we would actually do normally as humans. But now that we've figured out how to make profit off of things that we consume, and then we sell it to humans to really hijack their dopamine receptors, we now have this thing where we're completely abusing our dopamine receptors, and it's leading to mass depression. And no one's getting anything done, for the most part. It's actually a very good blanket way to keep everybody working and keep everyone a good little obedient worker. Make sure that they consume everything with the money they get from their job, and then, they're too depressed and too jacked up on dopamine and then too depressed to do anything else in their life. So that's our modern day, and that's a problem. Now, what's the solution? Cavemen didn't have to worry about this. Dopamine isn't actually bad. You'll see dopamine detoxes and people saying, oh, put away all dopamine. Make sure that you never have dopamine in your life. But dopamine overall is a chemical in our brain that is used for a very specific purpose. When we were humans and we had to hunt and gather food, dopamine would simply push us forward to the right path. If we needed to go and get water, or if we needed to go hunt a deer, whatever steps we were taking to go get the deer or get the water, our dopamine would spike and it would push us forward to make sure that we are doing the right thing. And now, the modern world has completely substituted everything that used to keep us alive, and now we're just abusing it. So it's not bad, it had a purpose, but we're using it and we're abusing it. And so that's why I'm saying dopamine should be limited and also not substituted. So my first contention is dopamine is way overused. I'm saying that we have to limit it because the amount we have is probably 10 times the amount that we should be getting at all. And this is not to say that, oh, so you just want to be 10 times less fun or 10 times as bored. Well, no, if you only spike your dopamine 10 times out of 100 rather than 100 times out of 100, you're going to have a better experience 10 out of the 100 times than you are 100 out of the 100 times, because it's not going to be watered down. You have very fine points of dopamine in your life that are actually pushing you towards things that you need to do, and they're actually useful, and they're actually very, very strong because they are limited. So they're going to be very few, but very strong, and it's going to be very strong whenever it does hit. And then my other contention is dopamine should also not be substituted. What do I mean by this? Every single form of dopamine in the modern age, 95% of the dopamine that we are consuming is a substitute for what we would naturally get out in the wild or just doing something in our day-to-day life. The consumption that we're doing is a substitute for something that we would have done 100 years ago, just going outside and doing something. But now we can get that same dopamine hit and have it completely substituted by something that is artificial and is on a screen or is in a food package. The problem with artificial dopamine in these triggers is that it's way too available and it's way too fake. I'll give you an example. Let's say you go and you watch my video. This is kind of in the format of maybe like an older brother. Maybe you see me, I don't know, for whatever reason, an older brother or a friend giving you some advice on how the world should work. This video overall is a substitute for a friend or an older brother or a father that you don't have. So nowadays, what we're doing is we're watching videos and we're latching on to influencers and figures to substitute a father figure or an older brother or a friend that would actually give you advice. 100 years ago, the way you would get this advice is by walking outside with your father while he teaches you a lesson while you're walking through the woods. But now it's through a screen, and there's 100 times more of it, and it's not as impactful. Every single form of dopamine that you see out in the world is a substitute for something that is natural, for something that would have occurred naturally in our life by us just being humans and actually living our life. But now it's substituted. I'll give you another example. When you go to McDonald's and you eat a burger, a nice fatty, juicy hamburger with salt and sugars and all this fat, it's simulating that, one, you went out and you hunted some wild beast and then cooked it, and it was super super juicy, 10 times juicier than anything you would have had, 10 times juicier, more sweet, more salty, so much more satiating. It's just a substitute for what you would have done if you were to go out and you were to hunt for this food, if you were to actually work for it. But now we're not even working for it. We're not even living our life in getting the dopamine that we deserve. So now that I broke down the overall idea that dopamine should be limited and also not substituted, how do we go about this? How do we live our life with this idea? It seems strange because everything around us is consumption. And it's not like I'm saying that we can't enjoy any of the consumption, the fake dopamine that this world has to offer. But what I am saying is that the reason that mass depression is rampant in this world is because we're substituting and overstimulating ourselves with dopamine. So the solution is to find out every single piece of media, everything you consume, every piece of food that you consume, every book that you read, every song that you listen to. You first have to track down and realize and analyze this piece of this object or this subject or this thing that is giving you dopamine and realize, what is this a substitute for that would not have existed 200 years ago? What would I have been doing 200 years ago to fill this dopamine need? If I'm watching a really funny reaction video on YouTube of, let's say 2 guys talking and reacting to a video, you would have to realize that that piece of media is giving you dopamine, and it is a substitute for something that you would have done 50 years ago with your friends. The people on the screen making you laugh is a substitute for hanging out with your friends and laughing with them. But instead, you're finding somebody through a screen. And that's how you're substituting your dopamine. So once you have identified every single thing that gives you dopamine and how it's being substituted, realize, what would I have done? This substitution didn't exist. What did my ancestors do? When you track that down and you can identify where my dopamine is going and what the substitutions are, you can more gear your life towards things that aren't substituted, towards things that are more real and limited. So you might go restructure your day completely. Maybe you wake up and you start scrolling through TikToks. What is that a substitute for? It probably is a substitute for a lot of things. It's your substitute for being constantly wanting to pay attention to a new thing, but it's drastically large now. So maybe TikTok you would substitute with hanging out with your friends, maybe playing a sport, and even reading. And it's funny that some people would say, yeah, like I don't watch TikTok, I read books. When you read a book, ultimately, you're not really learning that much, usually. It's more to substitute dopamine. Why were books created? It was to mass produce knowledge and give it to the populace. Also, to mimic somebody in person giving you advice. But now it's on a book. So books are a substitute for going over and talking to somebody who's actually an expert in that field. Do you realize now how deep this goes? It's not like, oh, all videos are bad, read books. Well, books, if you just read books all day and you substitute books for what you would do actually in the real world and talk to people and experience life and realize what those things in the book are actually talking about, the rabbit hole goes deep. And most people aren't living their life. They're substituting their life with fake dopamine and they're overstimulating themselves. So dopamine isn't bad, but use it as a tool and reshape your life where you can use dopamine to pursue your goals, not to stop them. Because everything that you're consuming ultimately is stopping it, because it's all a substitute. And everything that's a substitute is really not good for you. Is the McDonald's burger really good for you? Are you really making a friend when you're watching a reaction video on YouTube? Are you really getting the expert knowledge of somebody face to face when you're reading a book? Trying to get life experience from a book is strange. Get life experience from life. If you want book experience, then go ahead. I don't think that's conducive to your goals. At least it's not conducive to my goals. I'll say that for sure. Bye.